Back when I was just starting out, I would drive myself all across the country. These days, my schedule is handled. And you know what? It's nice. But sometimes, I miss those lean years. Out on the road, alone with my thoughts, I rode a lot while I clocked those miles. But do you know what I miss most? The food. Now, I don't want to get into any copyright disputes, but there's something pretty special about sniffing out those little hole-in-the-wall joints. And whenever I was in the South, I went looking for some good barbecue. My grandmother always talked about a little town tucked back in the Pee River Valley in South Carolina, famous for their whole hog barbecue. One hot August morning, I found myself flying along 95, making my way back home to Annapolis after a gig in Florida. If you've ever made that drive, you know it's just miles and miles of trees and nothing. So when I saw a sign for gas in the Pee River, about halfway through South Carolina, I decided to stop. I rolled up to an old-timey-looking gas station, 2 pumps, a little shop, and a roadside-style barbecue shack. There was smoke rising from behind the shack, hanging thick in the heat. But as soon as I opened my door and started to peel myself off those hot leather seats, I smelled it. Now, I'd been driving for almost 8 hours, 9 if Grandma was asking. And sure, I was starving. But when you know good barbecue, you know. And something smelled good. Almost too good. There was something I couldn't quite make. Hickory? Not mesquite. Sweet, but with an edge. I told myself to stop trying to top chef that smoke and just get myself a plate. But I was about to learn more than I wanted to about Pee River and the history of their special brand of whole hog barbecue. Because, well, it turns out that those whole hogs may never have been hogs at all. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 58, The Whole Hog. I filled my tank, parked my car, and made my way over to the barbecue stand. My shirt stuck to my back, but the smell almost made up for the heat. I got myself a pulled pork sandwich, and heck, why not try the sausage too? The awkward teen working the cash box let me know they made everything in-house. He wouldn't give me all the secrets, but he said they started with white oak and pecan, a special blend passed down for generations. The sauce? That was above his pay grade. I took my plate and made my way over to a bench. I picked up my sandwich. The sauce smelled sweet, but peppery. Definitely vinegar. By then, my stomach was protesting. Okay, Rodney, that's enough looking. Time to get tasting. But as I raised that overstuffed sandwich to my lips, someone shuffled around the corner of the building and sat down next to me. Now, I'd already felt a little bit like I was in a movie, and I don't have to tell you what brand of movie my brain goes to. Abandoned, isolated gas station, open fields, dusty road, and here comes this fellow. Clothes covered in dust, hanging loose on his bony frame, floppy, wide-brimmed hat slowly wilting down around his ears. In his hand, he clutched what could only be a fifth of something, not so cleverly hidden in a brown paper bag. He took a swig and a wheezing breath, and then he just started talking.
Yes, sir. Back then, Goldman family owned all of this. My grandpappy used to work the burn barrels when he was a boy. Wood and ash and fat. He always smelled like wood and ash and fat.
I sat there, mouth hanging open, sandwich hovering in midair, sauce threatening to drip. But what the heck? Why not? And come on, you know you wanted me to ask. What was so special about this blend again?
He never knew. No one ever did. Not really, excepting they owned everything. Even ran a nice little boarding house back then. Way on back there, through them woods.
He waved his still sloshing bottle back behind the pits. I saw a dirt road leading into the woods. Oh yeah, you know those trees. White oak, covered in Spanish moss. They're creepy, like Baba Yaga's hiding in there. I mean, it just cries, nope. I asked him if they got many guests.
Some. We were a good midway point, and we had the only gas for miles. People always got stuck here waiting for it. Coleman's mostly took in strays, drifters, runaways, folks looking to disappear. No one ever saw them again. Some folks said they were never seen again. But it was just rumors. Probably. Coleman's owned everything. Town needed them. Those folks had always just been passing through. No one was looking for them, except in one time. They took in some college kids on their way back down to Florida State for fall semester, and somebody did come looking for them.
Oh, I saw where this was going. I should have gotten potato chips.
Well, I'm not sure when it was. I was still in school most days, so I couldn't have been more than maybe 7. 60s, maybe. Yeah, 1960s. Maybe the 50s. Town was a dusty little thing. A few miles west off the roadway stop, tucked into the Petey River Valley. Dirt roads, dirt everywhere. Only real business was running moonshine, or working for the Colemans. Everybody knew everybody. No one paid much mind to strangers. They rolled in as quickly as they rolled out. Times was lean. Farms were struggling. Coleman's business kept those trucks coming back. Kept supplies coming in. Back then, that little gas station shop was sort of a town co-op. You could barter for just about anything. Not just food. Watches, flashlights, trinkets, all sorts of roughed up books and magazines. No one knew where they got it all.
Okay, but wait. When did those kids come in? You were telling me about the college kids that didn't pass through town?
That's exactly what I'm telling you about. You kids always want to move too fast. I was telling you, I was maybe 6 or 7 when those kids came. I remember because that morning I was in the shop here, admiring a huge cowboy hat for sale when a van rolled up to the pumps. It was one of those dang hippie vans, the German ones. It had curtains. I remember. The girls were pretty. There were 2 of them, Stacy and Veronica, and a boy, Chet. Chet tossed a football at me and said I could keep it. I remember.
Man, I had to work for this one. A question here, a prod there, and my friend kept pausing to moisten his throat. At one point he offered me a swig, and no thank you. Grandma would have smelled moonshine on me a mile away. But eventually, we got to the meat of it. The kids were from a little town outside of Richmond, Virginia, headed back down to Florida State. They'd stopped for gas, but the tanks were dry. Next gas station is about 30 miles down the road, the wiry-looking attendant told them. Best not to chance it. Come on in, get something to eat, then head on into town. There's a nice little motel. You can stay the night there.
You know, they still had a counter then. And fizzies. They were something. And sometimes, if we were lucky, they'd get a shipment of ice cream.
And they were making the barbecue the same way? So when those kids came in, they were looking at the same. You see how I had to keep staring old Grandpa back to the story? But yes, when they walked into that shop, they'd have been smelling that same sweet vinegar tang, seeing the same smoke, and swimming through the same hot August air.
Well, almost the same. Probably.
Probably. Anyway, the kid slid up to the counter and ordered. An elderly woman sat in a rocker, condensation rolling down her ice-filled cup, wispy white hair fluttering in the almost breeze of her wicker fan. "You kids aren't from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. She had one of those faces that always frowned. Stacy flashed her brightest smile. "No, we're just passing through from Virginia, ma'am. We stopped for gas, but the pumps are dry. We just stopped for some grub and then we'll go look up this motel in town," Chet added. "Motel?" The old lady perked up, her eyebrows raised. "Why, no need to stay at a motel. Our family has a boarding house right up the road, right back through those woods. Plenty of room this time of year. Then you'll be right here when the truck comes to refuel." "Hey," Chet turned as the attendant walked back in with their orders. "Why didn't you tell us there was a boarding house here?" The attendant flinched. "Mother," he said, "they don't want to stay at the boarding house. Nice kids like this, they're used to a few more creature comforts." He shuffled over to her quickly, but she humped. "Nonsense. Nothing wrong with the boarding house. It'll save them driving into town and back." "We're pretty low on gas," Stacy put in. "And it's a step up from sleeping in the van," the old man sputtered. But his mother cut him off with a whack of her fan. "It's settled. They can stay at the boarding house. You kids go on down that road that leads into the woods. You'll come right to it. You tell my daughter I sent you." She smacked her son once more before he could say anything. "Thanks," Stacy smiled and waved as the threesome made their way out. There was a muttered, "They won't be thanking you later," from the attendant. No one looked back, but Veronica raised an eyebrow. Outside the stand, a little wind chime clacked and whistled in the slight breeze. Veronica shivered when she took a closer look. It was strung with spoons and beads and what looked like bones. She started to say something, but Chet and Stacy were already in the van. She rushed after them and climbed in. Slowly, they started off down the dirt road that led into... Oh, come on, they went into the woods. Don't ever go into the woods.
They always go into the woods. Going in's the easy part. The tricky part's getting back out again. Locals won't go near them, least of all at night. Folks swear you can still hear screams echoing through those trees after dusk, just hanging there in the darkness. If you stick around till sundown, go on down there. Go on down that path a bit. You might hear them yourself.
New year, fresh start, and that includes my closet. This year, I am all about upgrading my look without blowing my budget. Thanks to Quince. I'm set with quality pieces I love, and their bamboo sheet set, let's just say I've been having the best sleep ever. However you choose to refresh yourself this year, all Quince pieces are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They're able to do that by partnering directly with top factories, cutting out the cost of the middleman and passing the savings on to you. Oh, and the Mediterranean fig candle that I just got from Quince, my whole condominium smells amazing. Upgrade your closet this year without the upgraded price tag. Go to quince.com/run for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/run to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/run.
Want prize with that? No, not fries. Prize! Just peel and play in the McDonald's app, and you could win one of millions of prize, like a cash prize, gift card prize, rewards prize, and even a McD's food prize. Say yes to McDonald's new game, Want Prize with That? And get ready for your chance to win. No purchase required. Codes available until March 3rd. Enter codes by March 24th. Chances of winning based on code entry time. Rules and app.
The van bumped down a dusty dirt road, a shocking spot of bright yellow amidst the dull green of the hanging moss and massive trees that seemed to press in on them. They rolled up to an old country house. Pillars, big wraparound front porch. It must have been nice once, but it was broken down and faded. Some of the windows were boarded up, and the shutters were barely hanging on. There was a narrow path leading farther off into the woods and down to a creek. You could almost hear it trickling away. A creaking set of steps led to a rusty screen door hanging half off its hinges. They opened it and found themselves looking at an empty dining room. "Hello?" Stacy called out from the threshold. "The lady from the gas station sent us. We're looking for rooms for the night." A small boy crept out of the shadows by the stairs. Stacy gasped. He seemed to come out of nowhere. He gestured for them to come in, and then put a hand up, as if saying, "Wait here." Then he disappeared through a door to his right. It had to be a kitchen. They could smell something wafting in that direction. Something familiar. Something with a strong hit of vinegar. It was definitely barbecue. This had to be the right place. Wait, does the boy not speak because he's scared or shy? Or because he can't?
Did you want me to spoil the story? No? All right, then.
I swear that bottle must have been magic. It never seemed to run out. When he reappeared, the boy was followed by a woman. The buttons on her cotton dress strained, held in place by a tattered, dirty apron. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun with wisps of greasy curls escaping. She had small, close-set, piggish eyes and bore a definite resemblance to the woman at the gas station. Her short, fat fingers clutched a large wooden rolling pin.
"So, Mama sent you? Well, come in. We'll get you set up."
She forced a smile. Her eyes glinted oddly.
"I'm Margaret. What brings you kids here? How many nights?"
"Hopefully just one, ma'am," Chet told her. "We're waiting for a fill-up at the station. We're on our way back down to Florida State. I'm Chet. This is my girlfriend, Stacy, and her roommate, Veronica. Sure hope that truck comes tomorrow. I've got football practice in a few days." Stacy squeezed Chet's arm, smile beaming. "Chet's being modest. He's starting as quarterback this year." The woman glanced past the students and locked eyes with the man standing in the alcove behind them that led to a small sitting room. He wiped his hands on a rag, mouth close set, small eyes squinting, and gave a slight shake of his head. Margaret grunted and nodded silently. Her eyes looked disappointed.
"Well, separate rooms then, yes."
She eyed Chet with a raised brow. He nodded, and Stacy blushed.
"Mouse will take you up and get you settled, won't you, Mouse? Make sure you put them in the east wing."
The man in the alcove cleared his throat, and the group turned, finally noticing him.
"I'm Clarence. Take care of the maintenance and the pigs. Whatever needs a doing. Keep away from that smokehouse. Don't want to go breathing that in. But you can take the path down to the creek if you fancy a walk. You catch any crawfish? Ma can fry 'em up for breakfast."
Margaret beat the rolling pin in the palm of her hand.
"Well, unless there's something else, go on up and get settled. You children must be exhausted after all that driving."
Mouse looked at the students, his eyes big and sad. He kept glancing furtively at the front door. Sighing, he turned and gestured for them to follow. Slowly, they made their way upstairs. They came to a landing, and Mouse hurried them past it. Veronica trailed at the end of the group. She peered down the dark hallway. There was a strange moaning, almost a muffled cry, or laughter. Something pounding. She swore she could feel the stairs vibrating. A door slammed somewhere, the sound echoing in the darkness. She shook her head. Old houses made noises, but still, something just felt wrong. Chet threw his duffel down on the bed. He sat down on the edge, head between his hands. He was exhausted, but also wired on way too much coffee. It was Stacy's van, but he'd done most of the driving. Sitting up again, he rummaged through his duffel, slipped a Zippo and a pack of Camels into his back pocket, and headed out of the door. He heard the girls giggling together in the washroom as he snuck past and down the creaking stairs. Outside, the sky was still light. He glanced around, and then he saw the dirt path. He decided to head down to the creek. Stacy didn't like him smoking, but he'd already said goodnight. They'd think he was sleeping, and then he could just slip back in after they went to bed. Okay, now, hang on. He went off on his own? Come on, boy. You know not to go off on your own. Might as well be wearing a red shirt.
Yep. And deeper into those woods, too. They just never learn.
The path ran through the edge of the woods. Chet slipped on gravel, but caught himself with a laugh and kept on moving. The sound of the water grew louder, not a rush, more of a consistent trickle. Finally, the trees cleared, and he saw the creek. Chet sat down on a stump by the bank and pulled his smokes out of his back pocket. He lit one, took a long draw, and sighed. He heard a rustle behind him. He turned to look, blinked his eyes. Nothing. Chet laughed, just too tired. He turned back to the creek and took a few more puffs. It was starting to get dark for real. Time to head back. He flicked his half-smoked cigarette into the creek and heard another rustle. A man was staring at him, eyes wild, face contorted. Chet took a step back. The man clutched what looked like a huge meat mallet in his hand. The wooden handle was almost as long and thick as his arm, and the iron head on the top was double-sided, one side for tenderizing, the other for cutting through bone. Before Chet could say anything, the man swung. The mallet hit Chet's skull with a crack, and he crumpled to the ground. The man cackled with glee. He reversed the mallet, and then in one smooth, practiced motion, he slit Chet open from stem to stern, slicing through his ribcage like he was cutting cheese. Grabbing Chet by the feet, he dragged his lifeless body back up the path. Then he cut off through the woods, whistling happily, face plastered with a grin. Stacy lay on her bed, fully dressed. She stared at the ceiling, counting chips in the plaster. Her eyes fluttered, and then closed. Suddenly, she woke up to a bang. She heard a shriek, and then silence. Stacy sat up, swinging her feet over the side of the bed. She slipped into her leather moccasins and slowly crept into the hallway. Everything was quiet. She could hear Veronica snoring from the next room. She tiptoed down the stairs and stopped at the bottom. She heard muffled voices. The kitchen. Oh, Stacy, nothing good ever comes from eavesdropping. Go on back up those stairs, girl. So there she was, alone in the dining room, straining to hear a whispered argument coming from inside the kitchen. It was Margaret, the woman with the rolling pin.
I told him not to touch them. I told him it wasn't safe. Someone is gonna come looking for that boy.
Someone shuffled his feet. Her brother, Clarence.
Margaret, it's Carl. We should have kept him locked in this room. You can't control him. You know you can't. He doesn't understand. It's a game to him. He thinks he's done good.
You have to make it look like a drowning. Shame to waste the meat, but it can't be helped. Set him off on the rapids. They'll cover up any mess.
Stacy gasped and then froze with her hands over her mouth. But it was too late. She could feel heads turning to look at her through the door, eyes staring, and then footsteps. In a panic, she quickly backed away into the corner of the dining room and fell straight through an open dumbwaiter. Stacy landed with a crash. No, a crunch. It was pitch black. She was laying on something. Sitting up, her hands gingerly felt the ground around her. Sticks? No, not sticks. Bones. They were wet and sticky, like they were fresh. Suddenly her hand grazed what could only be a skull. A human skull. Stacy screamed and tried to scuttle backwards, but they were everywhere. She put one hand in front of her and half crawled, half scooted until she hit a wall. Slowly, she stood up and started feeling around for an exit. Then there was light, an open door, and just as quickly the light was blocked out by a massive figure. It was Margaret. Stacy tried to disappear into the darkness as Margaret looked her up and down, shaking her head and beating the rolling pin into her palm. She came toward Stacy and whispered,
"Oh, I wish you hadn't heard that."
Stacy screamed as Margaret grabbed her by the hair, lifting her clean off her feet. She struggled, kicking and scratching, but Margaret was too strong. Then Stacy saw the rolling pin coming towards her. It hit the back of her head with a thunk, and her world went dark.
Well, I suppose we'll be filling the larder after all.
When she came to, everything hurt. She felt the back of her head. It was hot and sticky. Her eyes fluttered open. At first she couldn't see, and it was hot, hotter than even the worst August heat. Everything was hazy. She blinked through what she realized was smoke and saw bodies, pigs, and people. People hanging on hooks, strung up like hogs, slit down the middle, arms dangling, headless. Stacy tried to scream, but nothing came out. She was in the smokehouse, and there were people in the smokehouse. Her throat burned. Coughing and gagging, she blinked tears from her eyes and looked frantically for an exit. She crawled to the door, pushing through bodies and long strands of sausages. She tried frantically to open it, but it was bolted from the outside. She pounded on the door, but it was no use. The heat was overwhelming. She could barely see. Whimpering, she collapsed against the door, scratching and clawing at the wood until her fingers bled. She just needed air. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What do you want your 2025 story to be? Every January brings 365 blank pages. Your chance for a plot twist or a rewrite. Let therapy be your partner in writing new chapters and creating the meaningful story you deserve to live. When I wanted to improve as a writer, I realized I needed to improve as a person. What helped me more than anything else was therapy. If you get yourself together, you stop looking outside at the world and you start looking inside at your world. And once you become better, life becomes better. That starts with therapy. That starts with focusing on yourself. And BetterHelp can help with that process. BetterHelp is fully online, serving over 5 million people worldwide. Easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/run to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/run. Veronica woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the cracked shutters. Stretching, she climbed out of bed and stumbled to the washroom. It was early, but no one was moving. She went to Stacy's room and tapped on the door. No answer. It was unlocked, so she opened it just a crack and saw that Stacy's bed was made and the room was empty. Stacy never woke up before her. That was odd. She tiptoed to Chet's room and put her ear to his door. Silence. Veronica creeped the door open and found another empty room. Confused, Veronica turned and went down the stairs. She found Clarence at the dining room table, hunched over a bowl of something gray and slimy.
Hey there, little missy. Sleep all right?
Yes, thank you, Veronica replied. But do you know where my friends are?
They're not still asleep? Maybe they went off alone together. Might check down by the quake. You want some pudding? Mom made it fresh this morning.
No, thank you. Veronica wrinkled her nose as she turned towards the door. Finally, someone's made a responsible decision.
Pig's pudding is a delicacy.
Bet you'd like it if you tried it.
Veronica stepped out into the sunshine. She squinted in the bright light. The van was gone. Had they gone for gas without her? She considered going back into the house. Clarence had mentioned the creek. They might have moved the van, just snuck off for some alone time. Something nagged at her, so she followed the path to the creek, carefully picking her way down the gravel track. When she broke into the clearing, there was nothing. She put a hand up to shade her eyes from the sunlight, and that's when she saw it. She bent down next to an old stump. It was a Zippo lighter. No, it was Chet's Zippo lighter. Puzzled, she reached to pick it up when someone grabbed her hand. Whipping around, she saw the boy, Mouse. Something in those wide, panicked eyes told her to be quiet. Mouse tugged at her arm and pointed towards the woods. She let him lead her out of the clearing. They stopped behind a large oak, just in time to see a hulking figure break through the trees. His eyes were crazed. He clutched a huge meat mallet, gripped with both hands like a batter ready to swing. He stalked towards the stump where Veronica had just been, sniffing the air. She felt Mouse tugging on her arm again. He didn't have to tell her twice. She let him lead her through the woods, away from the creek and that crazed-looking man. See? Veronica's smart. She gets away, doesn't she?
Oh, wait and see. Wait and see.
When they came out of the woods, Veronica smelled smoke and something else, something cooking. Her stomach rumbled. Mouse looked carefully about and then pulled her quickly towards the smokehouse. The door was barred from the inside. Odd, she thought. It's not like the pigs would be trying to get out. Mouse ran to the door and gestured for Veronica to follow, then struggled to unbar the door. He couldn't do it alone. Confused, she helped Mouse lift the heavy bar and gasped when the door swung open. Something tumbled out. A body, red and puckered. She knew instantly. It was Stacy. Her stomach lurched. Her knees wobbled. Something was very wrong. She looked at Mouse. He didn't speak, but those eyes spoke volumes. They were too late. Suddenly glad she'd skipped breakfast, Veronica whispered, "Do you know where my other friend is?" Mouse sighed, then nodded, and led her towards the house. They passed close to the pits, close enough that Veronica could see shapes, hazy in the smoke, turning on spits. She told herself it was pigs. Only, they didn't look like pigs. Too long, too lean. Forcing her gaze away, she followed Mouse back to the kitchen. Motioning for her to wait, he climbed up on an old woodshed and slowly raised his head towards the kitchen window. After a moment, he waved his hand for her to follow. As quietly as she could, Veronica clambered up onto the woodshed, bringing her eyes level with the window pane. She almost gasped, covering her mouth tightly, biting her hand in horror. Chet, or what was left of him, lay carved on the kitchen table, split open like the bodies in the smokehouse. There was a meat grinder set up, stuffing casings of, well, she didn't want to think about what part of Chet they were turning into sausage. His skull was cracked open, and half of his brain, along with what was left of his organs, lay heaped on a cutting board next to a huge bubbling pot. This morning's pig's pudding. Mom made it fresh. Veronica moaned, clenching her stomach with her other hand. Now she was really glad she skipped breakfast. Brains? It's brains. In the pudding. That's a delicacy?
That's right. Pig's brains. Fat, liver, sometimes oats. Keeps you going all day. Going somewheres.
Suddenly the kitchen door swung open. It was Margaret. Mouse and Veronica quickly ducked their heads, and Veronica slipped. A log fell to the ground with a thunk. Inside they heard Margaret yell. Heavy footfalls got louder. There was an outside door to the kitchen. Sliding down the roof, they fled around the side of the house back towards the woods. They barely cleared the corner as the kitchen door swung open. They froze in the shadows, listening. No footfalls. Then they heard a huff. Mouse leaned his head back against the trunk of a great oak. Veronica did the same, trying to catch her breath. She tried not to think about Stacy, or Chet, or the pits, or the pudding. Chet pudding. Shaking her head, she rubbed her temples. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. Do you know where the van is? Mouse shook his head. If I could get the keys, I could get to the gas station. Get help. Mouse shook his head again. They're bad too? The ones that sent us here? Mouse nodded. But if I get the keys, find the van, we could at least make it into town? Mouse cocked his head, then shrugged, as if saying, can't get any worse. Oh, Lord, she's going back in the house.
Can't be that easy, can it?
They waited until nightfall and then crept towards the house. They would enter through the kitchen. It made less noise than the rusty screen door out front. Silently, Mouse climbed back up onto the roof of the woodshed to peer in the window. He nodded. The house was quiet. Slipping back down, he led Veronica towards the kitchen door, then opened it. They slipped inside and closed the door. In the dining room, Veronica froze. There was a pile of stuff on the table, a pile of their stuff, hers and Stacy's and Chet's. Quickly, she scanned the table for Chet's duffel. He'd had the keys last. Finally, she saw it, half hidden under the clothes and books. As quietly as she could, she tried to unlatch the duffel. Got it. And it was empty. Frantically, she checked the pockets. Empty. Mouse held up Chet's jacket, and there were the keys, tucked deep in a pocket. Success! Footsteps above them. Then, a door swung open upstairs.
Boy! Mouse, that you? What are you doing down there, boy?
Veronica froze, then looked towards the kitchen. Upstairs, feet plodded down the hallway. Mouse put up a hand, then motioned towards the stairs. Towards the stairs? Suddenly, he disappeared. He popped back out as if from nowhere and pulled Veronica into a cubby under the stairs, then quickly closed a hidden door. Feet thunked down the steps. Through a small knothole in the wood, Veronica saw a mouse rush back to the other side of the table, rummaging through their belongings. He grabbed an ivory comb and shoved it in his back pocket. Margaret reached the bottom of the stairs. Mouse froze.
Boy, what are you doing? Let's see those hands.
Mouse held up his hands, empty and shaking. He didn't have to pretend to be afraid.
Turn out your pockets.
Hanging his head, Mouse pulled out the comb and handed it to Margaret.
Well, a little thief, are you? Clarence will be giving you a few lashes in the morning. That'll teach you.
She grabbed the boy by the hair and lifted him half off the ground. Mouse opened his mouth in a silent scream, and that's when Veronica saw it. The boy had no tongue. Veronica huddled in the gap under the steps, knees pulled to her chest. She tried to unlatch the door to let herself out, but the clasp seemed stuck. She couldn't figure it out. Maybe locked from the outside. Finally, she gave up, and she waited, and eventually, exhausted, she slept. Veronica nodded in and out of sleep all day, trying to identify comings and goings by sound or what she could see through the knothole. Once, the hatch creaked open. Mouse threw her a sackcloth-wrapped package, and just as quickly the hatch closed again. Bread and cheese. At least she hoped it was cheese. She didn't care. She was starving. She ate as quietly as she could, and then curled back up in the corner. That night she heard 5 sets of feet go up the stairs, doors slamming. The moaning again. She was sure of it this time. Another slam, and then she heard. Was it feet? She held her breath. The door sprung open. It was Mouse. He helped her climb from the cupboard. Shakily, she stood. Mouse pressed a backpack into her hands. She put it on. Then he pulled her towards the screen door. It opened without a sound. Mouse held out an oil can and winked. Then he hugged Veronica and pushed her towards the open door. "Run," he mouthed. Hey now, don't be falling asleep on me now, friend. She's getting away.
Is she?
My companion opened his mouth wide, then lifted the bottle. And did he have stitches on his tongue? I rubbed my eyes. Must be the heat, Rodney. But I swear the old man winked at me. Veronica nodded, and then she ran. She had almost made it to the tree line when she heard a crash far behind her. She looked back in horror to see that huge beast of a man bursting through the trees out behind the house. She willed herself to run even faster. She ran blind, hands in front of her face, brushing back moss that stuck to her arms and her hair. She ran, dodging trees, jumping over fallen branches. She told herself, don't look back, don't slow down. She ran so fast, she almost missed it. The van, or what was left of it. Charred bright yellow paint gone. Seats torn apart, door hanging askew. She paused long enough to listen. Footsteps? She turned and started running again, towards what she hoped was the road. She heard screams, and then she realized she was the one screaming. She told herself the trees were getting thinner. She'd come out at the road soon. She'd be safe. She could hide, stop a passing car, get help. Just run, Veronica, run. Yes, run, Veronica, run. And then she ran into nothing. Her feet touched air. For a moment, she seemed to hover over the ground. Then the bottom dropped out, and so did she. Down, straight down, landing with a squelch and a crunch. Dazed, she felt around her. It was mostly mud, slimy old stone. It was round. The walls were wet. An old well. She winced. Her ankle was twisted, maybe broken. She sat up, slipping the backpack off her shoulders. It had cushioned her fall. She pulled it to her chest, and she listened. Silence. Wind in the trees high above. A bird, maybe an owl. Nothing. No footsteps. She slipped a hand into the backpack and felt around. More little packages. She pulled out a piece of bread and collapsed against the stone and muck behind her. Then she closed her eyes, listening for footsteps, and slipped into sleep. Well, you said someone came looking for him. Did they come back? The parents? The school? Did they find her? Did they find out what the family was doing? Did they stop it? I looked at the sandwich in my hand, at the long, stringy pieces of meat glistening with that sweet, tangy sauce. I smelled that cut of smoke mixed with something I couldn't quite place. The whole hog. Could they really have? I glanced over at my friend, head tipped over his eyes, head leaning back against the concrete wall. Brown bag bottle slashing about as his arm moved it towards his lips, even in sleep. I glanced back at my sandwich, still halfway to my lips, back at my friend, at the sandwich, and oh, what the heck. It's just a story. I took a bite. And you know what? That was some damn good barbecue. That perfect peppery tang. Sweet, but not too sweet. Smoky, but with a bite. I licked some of the sticky sauce off my fingers. Still, there was that something. Did I still want to know the family secret to that sauce? Or the smoke? Or the meat? My friend snored loudly. I looked back at the sauce now running down my wrist. Maybe I didn't know what it was, but it was good. Let's leave it at that. But something nagged at me. I thought about Veronica. Did she get out? Did she die in that well? Maybe it was haunted. Maybe her bones were still there at the bottom of the well. Maybe it was her folks heard screaming at the nighttime. Or maybe... it was probably just a story, right? Probably. But some stories feel a little too true. I just couldn't bring myself to take that barbecue back home. Not this time. and I didn't think I'd be stopping at PD River my next trip down. I listen when I'm warned. I'm staying out of those woods. Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Colette Anderson and produced by Abakar Adan. Editing by Abakar Adan. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman. Coordinating producer is Avery Siegel. Creature vocalization by Terry Cashburn and Colette Anderson. And artwork by Jessica Clarkston Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levitt. Executive producer at Will Media is Will Malnati. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.